Lieutenant Marcus Webb watched the new recruit cross the military base courtyard with his uncoordinated steps and vacant stare. It had only been 3 weeks since the young soldier had arrived, but for Webb, that was already enough time to decide that he didn't belong there. Recruit Jordan Hayes was different from the other men under his command. Too quiet, too observant, and that attitude deeply irritated the lieutenant, who believed that soldiers should be molded in his own image. Webb had built his reputation at the bottom through questionable methods that many preferred to ignore. He knew exactly how to manipulate situations, how to plant subtle evidence, and how to make his superiors see only what he wanted them to see. Over 10 years of military service, he had perfected the art of eliminating those he considered weak or inadequate, always keeping his hands seemingly clean. Jordan Hayes had become his newest target, not because of incompetence, but simply because his presence challenged the absolute authority Webb wielded over his unit. On a cold October morning, Webb put his most elaborate plan into action. During a routine weapons inspection, he discreetly removed a Beretta M9 pistol from the armory and hid it in Jordan's quarters, inside a rarely used backpack. It was a serious crime in the military hierarchy. Weapons theft could result in court-martial and permanent dishonor. Webb knew exactly how to orchestrate the discovery. He had already alerted the captain about possible irregularities and prepared the ground for the search to take place that afternoon, when all the recruits were in field training. What Marcus Webb didn't know was that General Anthony Brennan was at the base that day for an unannounced visit. Brennan was a legend in the American Army, a man who had risen through the ranks not through political maneuvering, but through brutal competence and a sense of justice bordering on obsessive. He had a habit of showing up unannounced at different bases around the country, observing operations, talking to privates and lieutenants without them knowing his true identity. Brennan believed that the true nature of a military unit could only be seen when no one was trying to impress superiors. On that particular morning, the general was wearing a plain officer's uniform without his general's insignia, observing the morning drills from an elevated position near the barracks. He had noticed Jordan Hayes in the last few hours, a young soldier who demonstrated quiet dedication and precision in every movement, even when he believed no one was paying attention. Brennan had also noticed Marcus Webb, whose arrogant behavior and disdainful glances toward the recruit had triggered all his internal alarms, developed over 3 decades of military service. When Webb entered the empty barracks carrying something wrapped in a cloth, Brennan felt his investigator instincts awaken. He silently descended from his position and moved toward the building, keeping himself in the shadows. Through a partially open window, he watched Webb open Jordan's backpack and carefully place the pistol inside, rearranging clothes and equipment to make it seem as if the item had been there for some time. The expression on the lieutenant's face was one of pure satisfaction, a smile that revealed there was no moral conflict whatsoever in what he was doing. Brennan remained hidden while Webb left the barracks and immediately headed for Captain Reeves' office. The general followed at a safe distance, his curiosity now mixed with a cold anger that he had learned to control perfectly over the years. He positioned himself near the window of the administrative office, where he could clearly hear the conversation that was about to take place. Webb knocked on the door with calculated urgency, entering with an expression of concern that seemed well rehearsed. The lieutenant's voice was deep and full of feigned concern as he began speaking to Captain Reeves. He mentioned that he had observed suspicious behavior from Private Hayes, that the young man had asked inappropriate questions about armory security protocols, and that he had been seen near the storage facilities at unauthorized times. Each lie was built upon fragments of distorted truth, the kind of accusation that was difficult to completely disprove. Webb suggested that a search of the recruit's belongings might be necessary, just to ensure there was nothing amiss, of course. Brennan listened to every word with growing indignation. He recognized the tactic because he had seen variations of it throughout his career: corrupt or simply cruel officers who used their power to destroy those who could not defend themselves. What made it all the more serious was the ease with which Webb lied, the confidence in his voice that came from having done it many times before without consequence. The general made his decision at that moment, but he knew he needed to let the situation unfold, to capture Webb in the full extent of his malice. Captain Reeves, a middle-aged man who clearly trusted Webb, immediately agreed to the search. He ordered 2 soldiers to be assigned to search Jordan Hayes' quarters as soon as the recruits returned from boot camp. Webb volunteered to personally oversee the operation, which was readily accepted. Brennan observed the exchange with a neutral expression, already formulating how he would intervene at the precise moment. He knew he needed witnesses, that he needed Webb's setup publicly exposed, so that no doubt would remain. The following hours were tense for the general, who kept a discreet watch while waiting for the right moment. He watched Jordan Hayes return from field training, dirty and tired, but still maintaining the correct posture of a dedicated soldier. The young man had no idea what awaited him, and that innocence reminded Brennan why he had dedicated his life to the army, to protect those who served honestly and punish those who abused the system. When the assigned soldiers began searching the barracks with Webb supervising, Brennan finally entered the building. He was still without his general's insignia, just another officer observing a routine procedure. Webb barely registered his presence, too focused on the anticipated satisfaction of seeing his plan come to fruition. The soldiers opened lockers, rummaged through drawers, and finally reached the backpack where the pistol had been planted. When one of them raised the weapon with a shocked expression, Webb theatrically feigned surprise and disappointment. The lieutenant immediately ordered Jordan Hayes to be detained and began to talk about court-martial procedures, about how that kind of treachery could not be tolerated in the American armed forces. Jordan was visibly confused, denying any knowledge of the weapon and trying to explain that he had never touched that backpack in weeks. His voice held the genuine desperation of someone who knew he was being unjustly accused, but had no way to prove his innocence. Webb cut off each attempt at explanation, his voice growing progressively louder and more authoritative. It was at this moment that Brennan decided to intervene. He calmly walked to the center of the barracks, his presence commanding immediate attention, even without the insignia he normally wore. He asked to see the weapon, and the soldier holding it hesitantly handed it over. Brennan examined the Beretta carefully, noting that there were no visible fingerprints, that the weapon was too clean to have been handled recently by someone who didn't know they were committing a crime. He then turned to Webb and asked a simple but devastating question about when exactly the lieutenant had noticed Hayes' suspicious behavior. Webb responded with overconfidence, elaborating on observations from the past 2 weeks. Brennan then asked why Webb hadn't reported these suspicions immediately to the security officer, why he had waited so long if he truly believed there was a threat to the armory's security. Webb's hesitation was brief, but perceptible, his rehearsed answer not quite fitting the unexpected line of questioning. Brennan pressed further, asking for specific details of dates and times, noting how Webb's answers became progressively more vague and contradictory. The general then turned to Jordan and asked the same questions, requesting that the young soldier explain his routine over the past few weeks. Jordan responded with surprising clarity considering the stress of the situation, detailing each day with the precision of someone who had rigorously followed military schedules. Several of his statements directly contradicted Webb's accusations, placing Jordan in completely different positions than the lieutenant had mentioned. Brennan noticed how Webb began to sweat, realizing that his plan was crumbling in ways he hadn't anticipated. It was then that Brennan decided to reveal what he had witnessed. His voice remained calm, but took on a steely quality that made everyone in the barracks freeze. He described in precise detail how he had observed Webb entering the empty barracks earlier that day, how he had seen through the window the lieutenant planting the gun in Jordan's backpack, how he had overheard the conversation with Captain Reeves where Webb had constructed his narrative of false accusations. Every word was spoken with the absolute authority of someone accustomed to having his testimony accepted without question. Webb tried to protest, claiming it was absurd, that he was a respected officer with 10 years of impeccable service, but his voice faltered, panic beginning to seep into his previously confident expression. The other soldiers in the barracks looked between Webb and the unknown officer making such serious accusations. It was at this moment that Brennan finally identified who it really was, pulling an identification card from his pocket that showed his rank of general and his credentials. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the understanding of what had just happened. Marcus Webb visibly paled as the reality of his situation became clear. He had just attempted to carry out a setup in the direct presence of one of the most powerful and respected officers in the American Army. There was no way out, no way to manipulate or distort what had happened when a witness of such caliber was involved. The general ordered Webb to be immediately detained, his service weapon confiscated, and him escorted into confinement, while a formal investigation was initiated. The soldiers leaped to carry out the orders, respect for Brennan's rank outweighing any loyalty they might have felt for Webb. As Webb was being led away, Brennan turned to Jordan Hayes. The young soldier was visibly shaken, processing how he had been minutes away from having his military career destroyed by lies. Brennan placed a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder and said that a soldier who maintains discipline and dedication, even when he believes no one is watching, is exactly the kind of person the Army needs. He assured Jordan that there would be no stain on his record, that in fact, the incident would be documented as evidence of exemplary character under unfair pressure. In the following weeks, the investigation revealed that Marcus Webb had done this before. 3 other soldiers came forward with accounts of abusive treatment, petty sabotage, and baseless accusations that had ruined promising careers. The pattern was clear and devastating. Webb had created a small reign of terror within his unit, protected by military hierarchy and the reluctance of young soldiers to challenge an established officer. All of that crumbled under the weight of General Brennan's testimony and the subsequent investigation, which he personally assured would be thorough and impartial. Webb was formally charged in a court-martial with multiple violations, including conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, dishonesty, abuse of authority, and attempting to falsely incriminate a soldier under his command. The trial was swift and conclusive. Brennan's testimony was devastating in its accuracy and clarity, leaving no room for doubt or alternative interpretation. Webb was found guilty on all counts, resulting in dishonorable discharge, loss of all military benefits, and a recommendation for civil criminal prosecution. Jordan Hayes continued his military career with an unexpectedly strong reputation. The story of what had happened spread throughout the base and beyond, becoming something of a legend about justice and integrity. The young soldier never sought attention or recognition for the incident, continuing to do his job with the same quiet dedication that had first caught General Brennan's attention. He was eventually promoted based on genuine merit, his name becoming synonymous with perseverance and character at the base where it had all happened. General Brennan used the incident as a case study during his visits to other bases, reminding officers that true leadership meant protecting those under their command, not exploiting them. He emphasized that military hierarchy was not a license for tyranny, but a sacred responsibility that demanded absolute integrity. His words carried weight not only because of his rank, but because he had demonstrated a willingness to intervene personally when he witnessed injustice, even when it would have been easier to simply look the other way. The repercussions of the Webb-Hayes case echoed far beyond that specific military base. Officers at other facilities began to review their own units with a more critical eye, questioning whether similar behaviors had gone unnoticed under their scrutiny. The Pentagon issued new guidelines on the supervision of junior officers and created confidential channels for soldiers to report abuse without fear of retaliation. The change was neither instantaneous nor universal, but it represented an important step toward a more just and transparent military culture. For Jordan Hayes, the following months brought unexpected challenges. Although officially exonerated and even praised, he discovered that some members of the unit still viewed him with resentment, as if he had somehow been responsible for Webb's downfall. There were those who had benefited from the lieutenant's permissive management, who preferred the predictability of his tyranny to the more rigorous scrutiny that now existed. Jordan faced cold stares in the mess hall, conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, the subtle loneliness of someone who had disrupted an established order even unintentionally. But there were also those who approached him with quiet gratitude. An older soldier named Patterson sought out Jordan one night after training and shared his own story of how Webb had destroyed his best friend's career years earlier with false accusations of insubordination. Patterson had lived with that guilt for not having had the courage to intervene, to challenge a superior officer. Seeing Jordan defended by General Brennan had been a kind of vicarious redemption for him, proof that the system could work when the right people were in the right places. Captain Reeves, who had blindly trusted Webb, went through his own journey of reflection. He requested a private meeting with Jordan and offered an apology that was clearly painful but sincere. Reeves admitted that he had failed in his responsibility to truly know the men under his command, to question convenient narratives, and to maintain the standards of integrity that the Army demanded. He promised to do better, not just with words, but with concrete actions. Jordan accepted the apology with the maturity of someone far beyond his years, recognizing that everyone was human and capable of error. General Brennan maintained occasional contact with Jordan through official communications. He never treated the young soldier as a special protege, or offered him undue advantages. That would go against everything Brennan stood for. but he ensured that Jordan had access to advanced training opportunities and that his progress was monitored by officers whom Brennan knew to be fair and competent. It was a subtle form of mentorship, the kind that didn't create dependency, but rather prepared a soldier to lead with integrity when his time came. 18 months after the incident, Jordan Hayes graduated at the Howe, top of his tactical leadership course. At the graduation ceremony, he received a commendation for excellence in military character, a rare recognition that values not technical skills, but the moral essence of a soldier. When Jordan went up on stage to receive the medal, he saw General Brennan sitting discreetly in the back rows of the auditorium. There was no wave or public acknowledgement, just a brief eye contact that communicated mutual respect and a shared understanding of what truly mattered in military service. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb faced a very different reality. After his dishonorable dismissal, he tried to rebuild a civilian life, but discovered that his reputation had preceded him. Potential employers ran background checks and found public records of his court-martial. Friendships he thought were solid evaporated when the truth about his character came to light. Webb had to confront for the first time the real consequences of years of manipulation and cruelty, without the protection of the military hierarchy to hide his actions. There were times when Webb considered seeking some kind of redemption, perhaps volunteer work or counseling that could demonstrate genuine change, but the pride that had been his constant companion throughout his adult life made it nearly impossible. Admitting profound wrongdoing, acknowledging that he had ruined lives for nothing more than wounded ego, required a kind of humility that Webb had never cultivated. He ended up working low-level security jobs, a bitter irony for someone who had wielded so much power over others. The military base where it all happened developed a remarkably different culture in the years that followed. New officers arrived having already heard the story of Webb and Brennan as part of their ethical training. The lesson was clear: authority without integrity is tyranny, and the American Army had no place for tyrants. Young soldiers were encouraged to report inappropriate behavior through appropriate channels, and those reports were taken seriously and thoroughly investigated. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was significantly better than it had been. Jordan Hayes eventually rose to the rank of sergeant, leading his own unit with a style that balanced firmness with fairness. He never mentioned the incident with Webb unless directly questioned, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. His soldiers respected him not out of fear, but out of genuine trust, knowing that he would protect them while also adequately preparing them for the rigors of military service. It was exactly the kind of leadership that General Brennan had hoped to see flourish when he had decided to intervene that October morning. General Brennan continued his unannounced visits to bases around the country, always observing, always alert for signs that the system was failing those he served. He knew he couldn't be everywhere, that injustices would still happen despite his best efforts. But he also knew that each successful intervention sent ripples through the system, reminding officers at all levels that accountability was real and that integrity mattered. The case of Jordan Hayes became his favorite story to share, not because it put him in a good light, but because it demonstrated that doing the right thing often required nothing more than being present and willing to act. Years later, when Jordan considered whether to remain in the Army or transition to civilian life, he often thought back to that day in the barracks. He remembered the terror of being falsely accused, the powerlessness of knowing his word was worth less than that of a corrupt officer. But he also remembered the feeling of relief when justice prevailed, when someone in power chose to use it to protect rather than oppress. That memory, more than any motivational speech or training manual, defined his understanding of what the Army should stand for, and that's why he decided to stay, to be for other soldiers what General Brennan had been for him in that moment. Crucially, a witness was needed who was willing to intervene when witnessing injustice.